Perfect. Okay. So I'm just going to get started. There's a lot of stuff in this topic today to talk about. So welcome to session 4. Today we're going to be talking about internal and external strategies for. So I think most of you have met me already, so this might be repetitive, but anyways, I'll just say hello again in case any of you are brand new to this session today. My name's Heather. I'm an occupational therapist in Toronto, and many of you have probably met me over the past 3 weeks, but again, in case this is your first life skill session, a bit about me. I have worked across Canada, both in BC and Ontario, and I've done some hospital and community OT work. And at the moment, I work in Toronto with people who've been in car accidents. And I work with people who've had head injuries, concussions, spinal cord injuries, mental health diagnoses, and physical injuries. So today, the information I'm going to be sharing in this life skills session is based on a variety of different cognitive strategies. And I've tried to pick things that I've seen work for people in my practice. And I look forward to having a discussion with you about what works for you. And we've had some really good brainstorming in the past few weeks. So I think having those open discussions will be a terrific part of today as well. What I'm also going to be talking about will build on some of the discussions we've had in previous weeks. So when we were talking about strategies to organize our week, steps to be kind to ourselves, you're going to start to see some patterns emerge with these strategies as well. But I'm hoping this will really build on everything we've been talking about in the past 3 weeks. So as a final reminder, this is week 4. I can't believe we're already here out of 4 weeks. And I know Nicole was just sharing that both the slide handouts are available if you'd like them. And also all of these different sessions have been uploaded to YouTube if you'd like to go back and take a look at anything that you haven't seen yet. So today, as usual, I'm going to be taking regular breaks throughout the presentation to make sure I can answer any of your questions and for us to have discussions. And at any time, if you've got any questions, feel free to also use the chat box and to write down any questions you have, and I'll answer those questions during the break. So with that in mind, let's get started. So first things first, I just want to get us all thinking about cognition and cognitive function. So what are we talking about when we're thinking about cognition? So this is an umbrella term that describes all the different mental processes that happen in our brain, which allow us to carry out tasks and actions. So this includes, over on the left, orientation. So this means knowing who you are, knowing where you are, what the day or time is, and what your circumstances are. The next area of cognition is attention. So this is the ability to focus on certain pieces of information in the larger environment. So there's different kinds of attention. There's focused attention, sustained attention. So that's the ability to maintain consistent concentration when you're doing something like driving. There's selective attention, which is filtering out distractions in your environment. Alternating attention, which is switching easily between one task and another. And finally, divided attention. So that's the multitasking, where you're trying to do a few things at the same time. Sometimes our attention is more automatic, where we do things and pay attention to things without even thinking about it. And sometimes attention requires a lot more conscious effort. So that could be when we're trying to learn a new skill or when we're trying to solve a problem. Another cognitive skill, a big area, is memory. So this is where we encode, store, and retrieve all sorts of different type of information from our environment and from our everyday lives. So there are some memories that are more sensory memories, so things in the present moment like smell or taste. There's short-term or working memory. So this is when our brain remembers important pieces of information at hand, which allows us to perform the task and process information as needed. So for example, short-term memory, this would be the memory you need to maintain a conversation with someone. And memory also includes your more long-term memory. So this would be information that's stored for a longer period of time. Things like life experiences or general facts. Maybe you speak another language or a skill. And the final area when we're talking about cognition is executive functions. So these are the more complex thinking skills such as goal setting, planning, organization, initiating tasks, problem solving, and self-monitoring, or paying attention to how we're doing. And these are more of the skills that allow us to work on goals and purposeful behavior. So when we're thinking about all of these different areas of cognition, there are going to be many strategies that we're talking about that actually overlap in a variety of different categories, and are also some strategies that we may have spoken about in previous weeks. So big picture, these are the 4 areas that we'll be looking into today with different internal and external strategies. So now that we've talked a little bit more about cognition and cognitive function, I want to give you some more information to start thinking about the different categories of cognitive strategies. So the first one is an internal strategy. So this means that this is a strategy that requires you to mentally process and think about information in a different way. So with these types of internal strategies, you're essentially reteaching your brain a new way to do things. And this involves a lot of practice. Internal strategies are also things that happen within ourselves. So an internal cognitive strategy, for example, is not something that you can physically touch. This all goes on within our brain. So just to get us brainstorming a little bit first, with all that information I've just given you, I want to get some input from you to start to get us thinking. So do you have any internal cognitive strategies that you use? So I'll give an example for me. So when I meet a new person, I try to repeat their name over and over again in my head to help me not forget it. So this is a strategy that I'm doing within myself that helps me train my brain to remember a new name. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and open up the floor to you to start maybe brainstorming or sharing, if you'd like, any internal cognitive strategies that you use right now that are helpful to you. Thanks everyone for sharing. I'm going to move on to talking about, we started to get into this, the more external cognitive strategies. So we're going to start to think about that on the other hand. So these are cognitive strategies that happen outside of ourselves. So this is a cognitive aid that we can physically touch. Or another way to think about an external cognitive strategy is this being a strategy or an aid that is something that someone else can do for you. So this could be a phone call to remind you to do something, or a person helping you out with a more challenging cognitive task. And I'm going to put this back to you guys again to start thinking about external cognitive strategies. So these are often a bit easier to identify than internal cognitive strategies because these are usually physical, tangible things. So I'll give an example for me as well. I use my smartphone and computer to keep track of my daily calendar, and it pops up with a reminder for me. Does anyone else have any other external strategies that they'd like to share or find helpful? And no worries, because we'll be chatting with some more. Okay, I see a comment here saying I use calendar reminders too, and the timer on my phone, especially for the oven. So that's another great example of an external strategy. Right. So jumping back in, now that we've started to think about the difference between internal and external cognitive strategies, I'm going to start to go into the different areas of cognitive function to start to think about what those different strategies look like in practical settings. So as we talk through cognitive functions and the different strategies, so internal, external, I want to start by briefly touching upon the idea of orientation, which is one of the most basic cognitive functions. So this means being oriented and aware of things such as time. So this is what day, day of the week, month, year. Being oriented to person, so who are you? And place, so where am I? And this can also include being oriented to your circumstances. So an example being, okay, I'm a mom with 3 kids. I worked at the bank for 5 years. So if someone is struggling with the cognitive function of orientation, this essentially is the same thing as being disoriented. And an example of this could be someone who's forgetting what day it is, or in more extreme examples, forgetting who they are or where they are. And in many cases, there's a medical cause related to this, or someone might be in the hospital. And while difficulties with orientation are less likely for people living in the community or even the participants in this session, I still want to briefly note some strategies with orientation, given that it's that basic cognitive function that we all need in order to participate in our daily tasks. And before we get started on this, I just do want to note, if you or anyone else you know do have changes that you're noticing in your orientation to time, person, or place, it's important to seek medical attention because there might be something else going on. So if we start to think about internal strategies or strategies within ourselves to address any difficulties we have with orientation, there actually aren't too many strategies outside of repetition. So say you're not always oriented to the time or date, location, or your circumstances, the best internal strategy is to repeat these details, both with yourself, so that could be by talking to yourself, or in conversation with others. So talking with others about the day, the time, the season, as well as talking to them about other things that are going on in the world. So current events, personal information, so on and so forth. Then there are more external strategies available to assist with any difficulties with orientation. So for example, this could be keeping a daily journal where you're recording the date, your name, the time, where you are, what's going on. Other strategies to help with orientation include regularly checking clocks or calendars, setting reminders about dates, time, or place. So this could be an alarm, a Post-it, or reminders from other people. This could also include signs on doors or cupboards, looking at photos or memorabilia, and finding other ways to make your surroundings familiar. As I mentioned, difficulties with orientation will be less likely for people living in the community, and just knowing who's in this group, also less likely for the participants in this session. But again, it still is the cognitive function that's the basic foundation for us to participate in any tasks. So before we move on to other areas, including attention and memory, I want to quickly check in to see if anyone has any questions about what we talked about so far. Does anyone have any questions for me at the moment before we move on? Okay. So our next area of cognitive function is attention. And I'm actually going to, I know we just finished chatting, but I am going to open up the floor briefly again to you before we get into this, because I'm interested to know, like, what are some challenges you find that you have with attention, and what do you do that helps? I'm going to hop back into the PowerPoint and get the ball rolling on some strategies that I've seen helpful for people in my work as an OT. So I think this was just touched upon a few seconds ago, but one of the first internal strategies, so things we can do within ourselves to help with attention, is pick your time of day. So in most cases, our brains deal better with tasks that involve conscious, effortful attention. So things like problem solving or new learning in the morning or mid-afternoon. So first thing in the morning, you've just had some sleep, or mid-afternoon, in most cases, people have had a break for lunch and might be a bit more rested. That being said, this time of day idea is going to be a little bit different for everyone. Sometimes people will say, oh, I'm an early bird, or I'm a night owl. So the bottom line here is to really think about when your attention or energy is better for you during the day, and try to plan the tasks that are harder or might require more attention during those times. With that last slide in mind, another internal strategy for attention is to make sure that you take breaks over the course of the day to avoid getting tired quickly. So if you're someone who struggles to focus or concentrate on a task, it's easy to get tired more quickly. And this can make it even more difficult to keep your attention up as the day goes on. So a strategy here is to try to take short, regular brain breaks over the course of the day to manage your energy and fatigue. And this will support you being able to keep your attention for a longer period of time overall. With the length of these breaks, again, everyone is going to be a little bit different, but trying maybe a 5 to 10 minute break every hour might be a good place to start. That's often what I recommend people try if they say they get tired and fatigued or they're losing attention. Another strategy for attention that we can control within ourselves is breaking down tasks step by step. So this already came up a little bit in our discussion. Essentially with this, we are trying to make sure that the steps in our tasks are not too big, and these are bite-sized steps. Another way to think about this is to avoid multitasking. You're doing one thing at a time and you're trying to keep things simple for yourself. And this helps by preventing us from getting overwhelmed. It reduces the demand on our attention, and it overall makes it easier for us to pay attention during a task. Another strategy with this when you're planning tasks is to think of picking things you enjoy. When you're doing a task that you like doing, it's also easier to maintain attention. So another strategy for attention that we can control within ourselves is by trying to stick to daily routines. And we've talked about this a few times over the past week, so you'll be hopefully a bit familiar with this concept now. But routines are essentially when we've got tasks that have become habits for ourselves. And once these tasks within our routines are our habits, where we've repeated things a number of times, they will be more automatic and they will require less attention. So this could be a morning routine, this could be an evening routine, or maybe a routine to do your chores. It will look a little bit different for everyone. But the bottom line here is with repetition in your routines, habits will be easier and more automatic for you, and there will be a lower attentional demand. Another internal strategy to try is to consider time pressures involved with a task. So when we are rushing through a task, it can be harder for us to maintain our attention. It's easier for us to get overwhelmed and distracted. So a simple tip is to try to give yourself enough time, or even give yourself a bit of buffer time when you're doing a task, to make sure that you're not feeling overwhelmed. This will help maintain attention as well. Another internal strategy with attention is to repeat, 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 especially for any new information. This could be saying it back out loud. So for examples, the steps needed to get something done, or repeating the information by writing it down to summarize the key ideas. So this can help make sure that you're paying attention by doing the repetition or the writing down. And this is also a helpful step that allows us to build our short-term memory, which we'll be talking about shortly. So bottom line with this step is repeat, repeat, repeat. Some specific strategies that might help when talking to others, or you could also ask people to use when talking to you, is to speak slowly and clearly and face the person you're talking to. This will help with attention in conversations as well. A final internal strategy to support attention is to practice setting aside distracting thoughts when you're trying to focus. So this might sound a little bit difficult. And a way of thinking about it is, here's an example. So say you're going to work and you have this major problem with your dishwasher at home. So an example of practicing setting aside a distracting thought could look like you saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to deal with that problem with the dishwasher later today after I get home from work. When I go to work, I'm only going to think about being there, and that will allow me to keep my attention focused on being at work. So by practicing setting aside those distracting thoughts, maybe for later or by writing them down, this helps prevent what's called divided attention, which is a challenge because when our attention is divided in two different places, this can cause our performance on both tasks to actually go down, and it can be very mentally draining. So in other words, you're kind of compartmentalizing a distracting thought, putting it over here as something you'll try to deal with later, which will allow you to focus on the task at hand. I'm going to move into external strategies for attention right now. So just to review, these are either physical aids or strategies outside of us that allow us to maintain our attention. So a simple strategy here is to try to remove distractions. So this could look like having one person at a time in a room with you, having a one-on-one conversation instead of in a group. It could look like turning off the TV or radio or music when you're trying to focus. Some people I work with wear earplugs or noise-canceling headphones when they're reading or looking at something that requires concentration. And the bottom line here is by controlling your environment to take away distractions, This reduces the attention demands and allows your brain to focus more easily. Further to the idea of removing distractions, another strategy is to try to keep a clean, organized environment or space around you. If your space is less organized or there's lots of stuff everywhere to look at, it can be harder to focus and pay attention on the task at hand, since there's a lot to look at and get distracted by. So by trying to keep your spaces clean and organized, this should also help make it easier to keep your attention up. Another external strategy to help with attention is a checklist. So this can help a person stay on task and stay focused. It's also a visual cue that you can go through step by step to stay on task, stay focused, and keep your attention going. A few more external strategies for attention include reminders to help people stay focused and on track. So this could look like, say, a timer going off every 5 minutes as a strategy to keep someone focused. So for example, there's an app called Due, D-U-E, that sends out persistent reminders over the course of the day and pings you at regular intervals. So you can set it, say every 10 minutes, until you mark a task as being complete. So sometimes having those reminders can be very helpful to help you stay focused and maintain attention. And there's many other similar smartphone applications out there. A reminder could also look like a simple alarm on a stove or on a wristwatch as well. And it can also look like cueing and support from other people to stay focused. So a side-by-side reminder to stay on task and keep your attention. Another external strategy for attention is to set up visual cues in your environment to attract your information to important pieces of information. So this could be a bright red flashing light on your car dashboard that tells you that your car needs service. Or here in the picture up top, you've got a bright red lock on your key to help it make it easier to find. Another example could be using your finger or a ruler to follow line by line in a book to help you pay attention to where you are and block out other stimuli. And you can also use a highlighter when you're reading to keep track of and pay attention to relevant words. And this is different for everyone. Depending on where you feel like you need more attention, this is where you could think about setting up a visual cue for yourself. So maybe it's a bright Post-it by your door or on your mirror. Maybe you wear a bright elastic around your wrist when you're trying to remember something. It's something that you're trying to draw your attention to in a visual way that says, look at me, remember me. So that's another strategy to help capture your attention as well. Okay, that was a lot of information, and we're going to be moving on to memory next. But before we do, I want to take a moment to see if anyone has any questions about those attention strategies we just talked about. And many of the attention strategies will also help with memory as well.
I was just wondering if you could repeat the name of that app that you were talking about.
Due, D-U-E.
Okay, thank you.
There's many versions of apps like that out there, which can send persistent reminders. And they're changing all the time too, which is why I sometimes am not even up to date. I mean, you guys might even know the apps better than me, but that's one I've seen work for other people. And certainly if there's anyone else who has any other strategies or apps like that, it'd be great to hear them too. Does anyone else have any other questions about those attention strategies before we move on to memory? Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next area of cognitive function, this is memory. So we've talked about memory in a variety of different ways in the previous life skills sessions, and we've come up with some great ideas in previous weeks. So I'm hoping what I present here will kind of gather a lot of that information together for you. So just to review, so memory, this is the process where our brain encodes, stores, and then also retrieves information from our environment or from our everyday lives. And there's a few different types of memory. So one is called a sensory memory. So these are very brief memories of the present moment. So this could be a sight, a smell, or a taste. Then there's the short-term or working memory. And this is when our brain remembers important pieces of information based on the task at hand. So this allows us to perform whatever we're doing. Say I'm cooking. For me right now, I'm doing this presentation with you guys. This allows us to process information as needed. So that's that short-term or working memory. Short-term memory is also what allows us to retain information long enough to have a conversation with another person. And then the final piece of memory is the long-term memory, which is when information is stored for a longer period of time. So things like general facts, experiences, languages, or a skill. So I'm going to put it back to you guys because I love to make us all chat. And I'd like to open up the floor to think about what are some challenges that you have with memory, and also what helps for you. So getting into the thick of it, thank you all for sharing. Those are great examples of strategies to help with memory. So what I'm going to start with, this is a more detailed slide, but this is a really helpful piece to look at when learning new memory, learning new information. So this one is called the PQRST strategy, and this stands for preview, question, read, state, and test. So this is a great series of steps that anyone can use when learning new information. So especially thinking about maybe something you're reading or something you're trying to learn. So say I'm reading a paragraph in a newspaper or something like that, and I really want to understand what I'm reading. So the first step would be preview. So this is when I'm just reading through it once first without any expectations, just to get a feel for something. So once I've done that first step, the preview step, I think, okay, what do I have any cute questions about this? So from what I read so far, what questions do I have? The next step is to go back and read it a second time and try to find answers to the questions you just asked yourself. Okay. The next step is then, okay, so say out loud or write down the answers to those questions. Okay, so what did I understand? Did I answer my questions? And the final step is test, which is read that paragraph again, so the third time, just to do a final check to make sure you've really understood something. And this essentially is encouraging your brain to process information by reviewing material more than one time and asking those important questions about something. And by using this strategy and this kind of form of reading, questioning, and reading again, this helps information to move into that short-term memory, and perhaps if you do it even more with more repetitions, that long-term memory. And I know that this looks like a really long strategy to use, and yes, there's no question about it. Like, it will take more time to go through this repetition and this question process, but it also means that you're more likely to remember what you've learned. So a quick suggestion around this is try to first memorize what that P, Q, R, S, T means, and remembering that the first letter stands for each of these words. So this is a general process of learning new information that you can almost apply to any situation. So repetition, questions, check, and repeat again, questions, check. The next internal strategy with memory that I'm going to talk about is visual imagery. So this is the idea that in order to remember something, try to create a picture in your mind. So for example, say that I want to remember to water my plants later. When I've decided, okay, yep, that's something I want to remember later, I take a moment and I try to visualize my plants and picture them in my mind. And by doing this, by really focusing on that image in my mind, that will help me recall to do this task later. So here's another example of that visual imagery at work. So say I meet a new person and I'm trying to remember their name. So in this case, this is just an example. This person's name is Angela King. So if I'm trying to remember her name, I can create two mental pictures. So one on the left is of an angel, and the one on the right is of a king. So by giving this person's name a visual image, this will help me remember her name more easily. Another internal strategy for memory is an idea called association. So this is a strategy where you are trying to make some sort of a meaningful connection between something you're already familiar with and something you want to remember. So this association strategy could be used to recall names, places, dates, or tasks you want to accomplish. So I've got an example here. So say you're trying to remember the birthday of your friend, and this person's birthday is on December 31st. So because you're already familiar with New Year's Eve, a major holiday on that same day, you can try practicing to associate your friend's birthday with New Year's Eve, which is a date you're already familiar with. So, okay, so it's my friend Joe's birthday, December 31st, right, New Year's Eve. And then if you repeat that association, you're more likely to remember that date. Another internal strategy for memory is a concept called first letter cues. And we started to talk about this a few slides ago with that PQRST new learning strategy. So first letter cues is a strategy of paying attention to the very first letters of words that you're trying to learn or memorize. So one way of doing this is by arranging letters in an alphabetical order. So for example, here is my shopping list, and I've put this shopping list in alphabetical order. So A, apples, B, bread, C, cream, and D, dog food. So by paying attention to the first letters of these words while I'm writing this list, this can help me jog my memory later when I'm in the store. first letter cues can also be used to form something called a trigger word, which is another thing that can jog your memory. So for example, this is a chore list that I've come up with for my day, and I've taken the first letters to spell out a trigger word for me in this case, which is disco. So D is for dust, so that's on my list. Ice tray refills. S, I have to do my shopping. C, clean bathroom. And O, organize my papers. And this can be anything for you. These are just a few examples that I came up with, depending on what's on your list or what you're trying to remember. A really important strategy for memory is something called rehearsal. So this is a strategy that involves repeating information. It could be silently in your mind, quietly to yourself, or it could be out loud to another person. And it can be used in a variety of situations for many different reasons. And it's especially helpful for something like quick, immediate recall. So for example, say I'm trying to remember a phone number to dial. So by rehearsing and repeating the phone number to myself enough times, this allows me to remember the number long enough to dial it. And this rehearsal and repetition strategy can also be used cumulatively over a longer period of time to learn information through repetition. So someone was talking about route finding and wondering about strategies to find routes. So rehearsal is a really helpful strategy that could be used for this. So by planning and repeating and rehearsing a new route over and over again, it will be more likely to move into short-term memory and then into long-term memory as well. So this strategy, active observation, really goes hand in hand with attention. So by trying to consciously pay attention to and take notice of your environment, this will help with encoding memory, and that will make it easier to recall later. So this also could be used in the context of route finding. So say you are learning a new route by paying attention to the colors or shapes or landmarks along the route and really trying to actively observe those things. That can help with recalling these details of your route later. An example would be parking your car in a large parking garage. So they all look kind of the same, but by really taking a moment to actively observe whatever the landmarks are around you, or the colors or the numbers, that will help you find your car more easily when you're finished shopping. Another example with active observation is in conversation. So consciously paying attention to what someone else says. And if you're trying to do that more effortful attention when you're in conversation with someone else, it will also make it easier to remember what they say. So again, this is a strategy where memory and attention really go hand in hand, because by actively observing and paying attention, it will also be more easily to encode and recall something. This internal strategy is rhymes, and I do believe someone mentioned this earlier when we were talking about different strategies. So rhyming is a creative way to connect facts together by sounds or lyrics or poems. So an example that you might already be familiar with is a poem that helps people remember which months of the year have 30 days. So if you're not familiar with it, the poem goes, 30 days has September, April, June, and November. So you can see it's rhyming, but it also gives us a way to remember which months have 30 days. And by using this rhyme or rhyming strategies in general, this can help us remember facts. Another internal strategy is categories. So this involves grouping information into meaningful categories. And this is especially helpful when we're trying to recall a large amount of information. So, for example, say you've got a long list of items you need to buy at the grocery store. So by grouping the items you need to buy into a few different categories, so say dairy, meat, vegetables, canned goods, bakery, etc., and by putting those categories and items into those different areas, this will be easier to recall that information later on. Another internal memory strategy is the story method. And this is the idea of creating a story, and it can be a silly, ridiculous story, to include all the things you want to remember. So I just made this up. So say an example is the things I need to do are feed my dog, call my mom, and pay my phone bill. So the silly story that I used to help me remember these things were, okay, the dog was hungry, so he decided to call my mother to get food, but he couldn't make the call because the phone bill hadn't been paid. So it's ridiculous. It's a really silly story, but by making it into a story, it actually makes those items easier to remember. It's kind of fun too, which I like. Believe it or not, we still have more to work through. So I'm going to quickly jump back into the more external memory strategies. I'm not going to spend too much time on these because we actually have chatted about them in previous weeks. Many of these things should be familiar to us. So moving on to those external memory strategies. So these are things that we can physically touch to help with memory. So my guess is from previous weeks of discussion is that these are things that you'll be more familiar with. So things like a desktop calendar, a day timer, a digital calendar. So the first pretty straightforward memory aid is the calendar. So again, these could be low-tech options or high-tech options. And if you're really interested in using a calendar more as an external strategy for your memory, I would suggest you actually go back and take a look at session 2, which is when we talked about strategies to successfully organize your week. And we got into using calendars in a lot more detail. And I'm not going to go into that today, but that is available to you back in session 2 if you're really interested in these strategies. We've also talked about this strategy in previous weeks too, but one external memory strategy is to create something called an organization station in your home. And what this means is it's a special place in your home where you keep certain items. So say your phone, water bottle, keys, sunglasses, etc. So maybe this is on a table near your front door. And by having organization stations in your home where you've got one place to find those items makes things easier to find. And this is also a visual reminder for things that you need. So here are a few other external memory strategies that many of you are likely familiar with, and that can be used for to-do lists or reminders. So one is the traditional notebook, and you can use this for anything. So maybe names you want to remember, your calendar, your to-do list, a reading summary, your medication schedule. It's really up to you. But simple notebooks are often, and I see this, some of the most reliable aids out there if you prefer a low-tech option. Some other options are whiteboards. So this could be something you put up that's very visible in your house to look at over the course of your day, or plan your to-do list or priorities. And a more high-tech option is using a smartphone or a tablet. And on these devices, you can have reminder apps, you can use voice-activated technology to set reminders. So say, remind me at 3 p.m. to call the doctor. And there are many different functions on there, including to-do lists, calendars, and checklists. So regardless of what you use, and I'll highlight this again, is that everyone's different. Test out what you think will work best for you. Try to use it for a while, see if it's a good fit. And if you then want to try something different, move on to something else. You don't necessarily need to do all of these things at once. Again, that might be quite overwhelming, but these are just different options to try out. A few other classic memory strategies that I'll just briefly highlight: setting an alarm or a timer to ring at the time you're supposed to remember to do something. So this could be a smartphone, a wristwatch, an alarm on your stove, whatever that looks like for you. A few other memory strategies that are external that I'll briefly touch upon are setting up voicemail. There's also apps out there that do voicemail to text or voicemail to email so that you can get that information in text format if you prefer that. Another memory strategy, if you're having difficulty recalling conversations or information, is to also use a voice recorder or a voice note. And this could be something as simple as a cassette player or on your smartphone. We mentioned this a few weeks back, but another external strategy that you can use, particularly if you have many medications, is a pill organizer. So that's the one on the right where you split things into morning, noon, evening, and bedtime. Or you can actually ask your pharmacy to blister pack your medications, which is the picture on the left where they've already prepared everything for you. A few other notes about external memory strategies. Smartphone applications are available. There are hundreds of different applications out there that can help with everything from alarms, checklists, reminders. But a few I just briefly want to highlight is that most smartphones have a Find My Phone app that can allow you to locate your phone if you've misplaced it. There's also an application called the Tile application, which you can see on the picture on the right. There's a little white card that this is something you can attach to keys or a wallet, and a smartphone can be linked to that card to help you find any items that you've lost. And the last external strategy I'm going to talk about is it's okay to ask for help from others to remember things as well. So this could look like someone giving you a cue. So say, hey, did you remember to take your medications today? Did you remember your keys? This is when your appointment is this afternoon. And this could be a phone call, a text message, or something in person. But this is another big external memory strategy as well. Okay. We're almost done, folks. I know this is a lot of information, but does anyone have any questions right now before I move on to the very last section, which is, all right. Okay, so the last area of cognition I'm going to be briefly talking about is executive functions. So this is complex thinking, such as goal setting, planning, organizing, problem solving, and initiating tasks. And a number of these strategies we have already talked about in the life skills sessions, such as strategies to successfully organize your week. And many of the strategies here will overlap with things we've already spoken about with attention and memory. So this section will be a bit shorter because a lot of those strategies overlap in all of the different areas. So one of the skills in executive function is something called initiation, which is the skill of beginning a task. So many people who have cognitive challenges may find it more difficult to start a task or activity. And this is not the same as not having motivation, it's the difficulty of getting going. So these internal and external strategies we've already talked about previously, but I just wanted to highlight these as being something that could be helpful if you have trouble with initiation. So for example, internal strategies can be breaking things down into bite-sized tasks, taking breaks, keeping with routines, and another strategy is mental rehearsal, which is mentally planning and rehearsing completing a task in advance before you even go about doing it. So you're kind of mentally preparing yourself to get going with something. And some external strategies to help with initiation are reducing distractions in your environment, using a checklist to make sure you get everything you need to get done, using reminders or an alarm, doing a task that you might find difficult to initiate side by side with another person, or requesting external support. So maybe this is a reminder or accountability to another person to initiate that task. So your executive functions also involve things like planning and problem solving. So the ability to develop a plan with steps for a goal to be achieved, organizing and sequencing steps that need to be completed. And problem solving is another piece of executive function, which is the ability to take in information available, process it, and come up with a solution. And many of these strategies are similar, so I've bundled them together here. So some internal strategies can include breaking down the task, making it as simple as possible, planning breaks and extra time, especially in case a problem comes up, you've got some flexibility. Visualizing problems in advance. So this is when you are thinking, okay, this might be something I encounter. What are some possible ways I could deal with this problem if it comes up? Another strategy is mental rehearsal, which we've previously talked about. So rehearsing ways to deal with the problems that might come up, or rehearsing your plan in advance. And another internal strategy is talking aloud. So saying your plan out loud to yourself, or brainstorming what your plan could look like, or brainstorming how you would deal with any problems that come up. And some external strategies for planning and problem solving. So you can write out the steps for whatever your plan is to complete a task. Use a checklist to make sure you're checking off the different steps on your plan. If there's a problem that comes up, you can write a pro-con list to analyze the positive and negative sides of a problem. Discuss your plans or problems with others, and ask for help from others if you need it. A few more sections to go. So with executive function, I also wanted to take a minute to talk about goal setting, because this can be a challenging thing to do. So some specific internal strategies for goal setting includes making SMART goals. So I'll show this slide on the next page to break down what SMART is, but that means specific, okay, this is what I want to do. Measurable, okay, how will I know if I've achieved my goal? Achievable, can I do it? Realistic, is it possible for me to achieve it? And timely, so when do I want to accomplish my goal? So these are things to think about internally when you're goal setting. Other internal strategies include planning breaks or extra time to complete your goals, and mentally rehearsing what completing your goals would look like in advance. Some external strategies to help with goal completion include writing down your goals, keeping a to-do list, discussing your goals with other people to help set them, and asking for support to follow through with your goals if needed. And just so you've got the SMART goal slide here, this is what SMART goals look like. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. All right. And the final big executive function skill I want to touch upon is the idea of self-awareness and monitoring. And we talked about this a little bit last week when talking about practical ways to be kind to yourself. So some internal strategies to help with that self-awareness and self-monitoring include the habit of checking yourself. So this is looking at moments over the course of your day and planning to check in with yourself to see how you're doing. So how are you feeling? Happy or sad? Are your thoughts negative or positive? How are you doing with your tasks? What's hard? Have you gotten sidetracked? That's just a moment, whatever it looks like, to check in with yourself. Other internal strategies are taking a break to analyze how you're doing in those tasks and planning those breaks in advance. And reframing your thinking. And we talked about this last week. So if you notice that you are thinking more negatively when you do a check-in, try to practice reframing your thinking in a more positive way. And this is that positive self-talk we discussed in more detail last week. And a few external strategies for self-awareness and monitoring include keeping a journal, which is where you can record what you noticed about yourself when you did those check-ins, getting feedback from others about how they see how you're doing, which can help you to analyze yourself and be more self-aware, and external support from others. Okay, and my final slide here, just to sum it all together, because I know that's a hefty amount of information. And we talked about this a little bit in a break, but remember with all of these strategies we've talked about is just start simple and start small. So pick one or two that seem really relevant for you and start there. See how that goes for you. Trial and error is okay. Things will look a little bit different for everyone with all of these strategies. Keep practicing. A lot of these things won't be easy or intuitive to begin with and might require more effort as they become habits. But the more you do any of these strategies, the easier they will become. And the final thing I want to leave you with is, with anything you're trying, remember to be kind to yourself. This isn't always easy. There still will be some days where these don't always feel like they're a good fit for you, and that's okay. And be sure to ask for help when you need it. Again, this is not an exact science. There's a lot of different things that work for different people, and be sure to ask for others' support if you need it to work on any of these strategies. And on that note, folks, we're done.